Marc Paladino, and welcome to Crosslights. And we are studying together the re-examining of the end times, and we are using as a textbook, I guess if you would call it that, my recently published book called The Threshold of Exile, Examining New Testament Prophecy and Eternal Destiny, which is shamelessly displayed behind me. Just wanted to keep you interested in the book. Hopefully you'll pick up a copy on Amazon or Ingram Spark or Barnes & Noble. It's available on paperback as well as ebook format. But this is an opportunity for us to kind of go through the book and learn a little bit about the way the book is laid out and learn about the subject matter. And you have an opportunity, if you want to go to crosslights.net, there's a contact page there. You can email me. I'll get an email. If you have a question or a comment, I'll be glad to try to deal with it as these things come up. Very pleased, very encouraged by the number of hits and shares that have been on the YouTube video. We've gotten quite a number just in the first week of that it's been posted, and we're just getting a really amazing volume of people that are taking a look at the video and sharing it. So that's very encouraging to me to know that there is an audience out there for this topic, and like me have wanted to take a second look at what we commonly understand about eschatology and last things in the end times, and start to question some of the things that we have embraced over the last decades especially. But we left off, this is episode 3, as I said. We'll probably do this and maybe one more session on chapter 1, and then we'll move on. But we were talking last time about a particular setting, I guess we could call it, a class that I had, and through the course of my discussion and unpackaging the visions of John in Revelation and some discussion, the revelation that came to them, the release of anxiety that they experienced as they began to understand what I was trying to say. And of course, I was teaching the book of Revelation. A pastor friend of mine had invited me to come and teach this group, and after some discussion about my views being quite different than what was being commonly taught in evangelical circles, and of course had been taught through the Jesus movement where we both grew up in the Lord, we agreed to go forward with the class. And with John's recorded visions are closely connected, and I'm working from page 8, by the way, if anyone is actually using the book right now. John's recorded visions are closely connected to what we call the Olivet Discourse, and that discourse is when Jesus, on the eve of his crucifixion, or the night before, the week of his crucifixion, took his disciples apart, and he began to tell them about things that were about to come. And this is referred to as the Olivet Discourse. It's very famous prophetic literature that's recorded in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. Jesus offers some similar comments in Luke 17 as well that are similar to these, but in a shorter, different session. And most commentators, most teachers of eschatology will start, or at least go to the Olivet Discourse as part of the discussion of end times, because that's one of the common places where people believe to be Jesus talking about the end of the world. And so it's a complement to the book of Revelation. And it's often referred to as the little apocalypse. But when we gathered week after week to unpack the details of this particular prophecy, and I began to raise questions about whether or not Jesus was actually talking about the end of the world, or whether he was talking about things that the disciples themselves would see. And that statement, that observation occurs quite frequently in all 3 of the accounts of this Olivet Discourse. The Lord clearly tells the disciples these are things that they would see. And which begins to raise the question, well, if they're going to see it, what's it got to do with the end of the world? And some people have raised the question about something called the transgenerational you, or when he says you, it can be the disciples, it could be the Jews, it could be the future generation, and I'm going to actually explain that a little bit as we get into the Olivet Discourse, which we will in detail in a couple more chapters. We're going to really unpackage this whole thing. But Jesus really was telling his disciples what was going to happen in the course of their generation. He even told them that their generation wouldn't pass until these things took place. And so we're talking about the wars and rumors of wars, of course, and the false prophets and false Christs and messiahs and all kinds of things like this that were going to take place in their generation. And it is actually interesting that all of these things really occurred in the time frame between Jesus' death, resurrection, and the Pentecost, which is 30, depending on your chronology, 30 or 33 A.D., up until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. So there's a 40-year period, or what biblical scholars understand to be a biblical generation, 40 years. So when Jesus said this generation will not pass, I think we already mentioned the fact that no, he did not know the day or the hour. Only the Father knew that. But Jesus did clearly tell his disciples he knew the generation, and it would be their generation that would see these things. And now, as we go, we're going to have to understand how these things laid out, how they took place, and especially some of the highly prophetic language and the cosmic disturbances that he describes. But all these things occurred during that season of the 40 years of which the disciples were ministering and sharing and became apostles and began to spread the gospel throughout the civilized world. And it's interesting that even non-Christian historians, and the Bible itself, the New Testament itself, actually affirms some of these signs that Jesus talked about. But not only that, there are non-Christian historians, Josephus, Tacitus, people like that, who make mention of things not necessarily to confirm the words of Jesus, but just simply in their histories give us accounts of things that really what Jesus said would happen. And so, but then it gets a little sticky when you start go from just the historical into what we call the linguistic aspects, and that, part of our misunderstanding or a mistaken understanding of when or how these things are going to take place is that we fail to account for Jesus' linguistic style, or the style of speech that he used when he said that the sun would grow dark and the moon would not shed its light and the stars would fall from the sky, and all these things are going to happen, and we take his words to be as literal, but yet he's really talking in the symbolic style of the ancient prophets. And these prophets never actually described the end of the material universe. When they described these things, they were describing economies and governments crashing and collapsing in a style that was consistent with the ancient Near East. And so basically what it's telling us is that God is arriving on the scene to take care of business. But he's coming in not at the end of the world, but in a strategic period within the context of human history. And so we want to look at, for example, a good example of this is Isaiah 13. And this is language we mentioned earlier about Jacob and Joseph. We won't go back there again, but Isaiah 13 is often one of my favorite spots to look at this. And Isaiah says that the oracle concerning Babylon, which by itself should tell us enough, but since we tend to be wooden-headed, we'll need to read some more just to make the point. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel with fury and burning anger, to make the land a desolation. Again, this is an oracle concerning Babylon. He will exterminate its sinners from it, for the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises. The moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. Now that sounds like the end of the world. It sounds like the whole world's going to get punished. It sounds like the whole world's going to collapse. The stars are going to fall, all this stuff. But if we go down a couple more verses to verse 17, look what it says. I am going to stir up the Medes against them, and Babylon, the beauty of kingdoms, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So what all of this is talking about is the overthrow of the dominant nation in the civilized world at the time. Okay, and so we need to understand that this fall of Babylon that's being prophesied now later in Isaiah 44, we learn that it is Cyrus that's going to be the principal leader in the Medo-Persian Empire that's going to overthrow Babylon and become the new center or the new power in the civilized world. And so what Isaiah is describing is not the end of the world. He's describing the end of Babylonian supremacy. He's describing a transition of power in the civilized world at that time. And so in roughly, it was at 539 BC, Cyrus comes, they overthrow Babylon, and Persia becomes the new center, the new power center of the civilized world. This is a big deal. Why is it described so dramatically? Well, this is a big deal, folks, because you have to understand the Jews have been in exile during this time for 70 years. And now God is going to release them. Cyrus is going to issue a decree to release them. And Isaiah even says in one of his prophecies that the trees of the field will clap their hands and the mountains will shout for joy. Why? Because God's people are returning to their land, and they are returning to rebuild their city and their temple and the centerpiece of God's redemptive purpose at that time. And we read in Isaiah 44:28, "It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform all my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple, your foundation will be laid." And that's exactly what Cyrus did. This is written well in advance of the man even being born. And so when Cyrus came into power, and he was not necessarily a perfect person, but what happened was he did release them to go back, issued a decree for them to go back and rebuild their temple and their city. And so what we're learning from this is these are huge things in the realm of the Spirit, in the realm of God's kingdom, so that they are described with such earth-shattering language. Economies are falling, kings are falling, laws and customs are falling, and they're being replaced by something new, and especially something new like this where we have a grand event where God's people are going to return to their homeland and rebuild their city and temple, okay? And so we kind of tied these ideas here to the Olivet Discourse and the book of Revelation, and we learned that, well, the end of the world as we think of it was not really what the apostles had in view or what Jesus had in view. What he had in view was the end of the age, and that's the questions that the disciples asked him. What will be the sign of your coming or your arrival and the end of the age? It's unfortunate that some older versions said the end of the world in the sense of the planet, okay? Jesus, they were inquiring about the end of the age, and they said, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. We're going to look at all of this in the coming chapters on the Olivet Discourse. But what the key aspect of this was the approaching Roman invasion, very much as Babylon had come and destroyed the city and the temple, so it was going to be with Rome now. The Jews are on this threshold, this brink of exile, because of their disobedience and because of their rejection of their Messiah. So this became clear to the students then that what first thing they need to understand, that these things were not really going to be global events as much as they were going to be localized within the Mediterranean world at that time. Now it's very interesting that when you get into Revelation, there's some interesting words that must be accounted for. Now, I want to be very careful here because I'm not a Greek scholar, and I don't want to give you the impression that I am. I would never represent myself as such, but I do have resources, and I do study many of them to try to determine what is the best way that something should be translated. And there's a tremendous verse that I've discovered in Revelation 3. But in order to understand it, we've got to question what maybe even some of the more popular translations would present to us. Now, When I say this, I'm giving you my opinion. Okay, there's nothing here written in granite. But let's just say something first about Greek words. There are a couple of Greek words that are often mistranslated or misused. Some translators use them, some don't. The first one is the term earth. The term earth actually comes from a Greek word gay. We could spell that G-E or G-E-H or G-A-Y, but it's pronounced gay. And it simply means earth or land, okay, similar to the Hebrew word eretz, which typically refers to a land, okay, like the land of Babylon, the land of Israel. Eretz Israel is the land of Israel. And so this word appears quite often in Revelation, and often it is assumed to mean the planet, when in fact it may very well and probably means the land as the theater of Revelation's conflict. The other word is oikomene. Oikomene is a word that when it says world, we think often in terms, again, of a globe, but we're not thinking about the globe here. We're talking about the habitable world, and in many cases meaning the Roman Empire. It's a word that's used in Luke 2:1 when it tells us about that Caesar, put out the census, so all the people had to be counted. And he said the census went out to the whole world in some of the older translations, but it went out to the oikomene, it went out to the Roman Empire. And so it can often be translated as the Roman Empire of the first century AD. Now I'm saying this because we have to be careful too. This does not mean that a non-Greek reader can just go into a concordance and say, oh, this can mean that, because every word has a range of meanings. Even English words have a range of meanings that depending on something very important as how they are to be defined, and that is the context. So the context in which something is used plays a huge part in how we translate it. We just don't pick a word out of Strong's that has 5 different definitions and say, oh, I think I'll use that one. What does the context require? What makes sense to the context in front of us? And so in Revelation 3, 10, and 11, I'd like to suggest to you that the way this is typically translated raises a lot of questions in my mind, because it is not consistent with the context of the first 3 chapters and the entire book of Revelation. The entire book of Revelation has bookends, talking about the nearness of the event, soon, quickly, near, the time is at hand, okay? So the whole prophecy is time-stamped and set within these bookends from Revelation 1 to Revelation 22, that these events are going to happen soon. They're going to take place soon. And so when we look at certain words, we want to be careful that they suit the context, that very context. So when we read Revelation 3, 10, and 11, it says, because you have kept the word, he's speaking to the church in Philadelphia, a first century church, because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I will also keep you from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come on the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. Behold, I'm coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, so that no one will take your crown. Now, I want to suggest to you that we just maybe question a couple of word choices here, and maybe that this could be read just like this. Because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I will keep you from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come. That's an important translation, because the word there is mello, and that word means that something is imminent, about to take place. Okay, so what John is describing here, what the Spirit is describing through John, is something that is about to take place, and it's about to come upon the whole oikumene. The whole empire is going to be affected by this tower of testing, and it says it's going to test those who dwell on the land. So the picture that I get from this text is that Philadelphia is going to be kept safe during a great time of testing and trial that's going to occur through the whole empire, and it's going to be specifically to test or try those who dwell on the land, which would be Israel. Okay, now the icing on the cake is verse 11. Behold, I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, so that no one will take your crown. The whole thing gets this exclamation point that this has to do with Jesus' arrival in judgment in the first century. He's talking to a first century church, you see. Now again, this is my opinion on how this should be translated, and I think it's reasonable because it suits the context. If we look at Revelation 1 and 1 to 3, he says the time is near. The events are going to happen quickly. If you go up to 2, 9, and 10, he talks about the events being soon, quickly. If you go to Revelation 22:20, the time is near, coming quickly. Everything speaks of imminency. Everything speaks of something that is now, okay? And we discussed already previously that the disciples were not, the apostles were not misguided or deceived when they understood and anticipated that Jesus was coming, but he was coming on the clouds of judgment, okay? So when we look at this verse, what is it telling us? What is this letter saying to a first century congregation in Asia Minor? It's telling that, number one, it warned of a great trial that was about to commence, and the translations point out about to, okay, commence. It included that it would affect the entire Roman Empire, the oikomene. It warned of a trial of those dwelling on the land, which would be the land of Israel. Promised that it was Christ's coming was in the midst of this, and it was going to be very soon. And he tells the church to hold fast. Okay? Now, similar to what we said about Timothy in the last session, you try to picture these skeletons in Philadelphia holding fast to the pillars of their church, waiting for Jesus to come, or waiting for them to get freed or whatever it is. This is a real-time situation for the church in Philadelphia, and he's telling them to be faithful and hold fast to what they have and to trust that God's going to deliver them through this time of tribulation and trial and testing, okay? So this message to Philadelphia is all-inclusive. It specifies the recipients, Philadelphia, the time it's about to take place, the events that are going to happen. It's a time of tribulation and trial that's going to affect the whole Roman Empire, but it's going to be the focal point is going to be the people of the land, the judgment upon the Jewish nation at the time. It brings about the promise that Christ is going to be coming in the midst of this, and so we get all of this in one statement. It kind of encompasses the whole idea of what I'm trying to convey in the book and in these sessions. What was going on in this first century, and the whole prophecy, as I said, of Revelation was time-stamped, using terms about to, near, at hand, soon, quickly, indicating that the events were about to occur very soon. Note the command of the angel in the last chapter of Revelation that John should not seal the vision because the time is near. I'm reading from page 11 in the book. This is what it says. It says, "And he said to me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near." John, don't seal it up because the time is near. The people now need to understand it. The people to whom it was addressed need to understand this prophecy. Okay? Now, contrast that to centuries earlier when the prophet Daniel was told to seal his visions because the time of their fulfillment was well beyond his own time. And it says in Daniel 12:4, and then also in 8 and 9, "But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end," not the end of time, the time of the end. Again, the end, we're speaking here of the end of the age. "So I asked, my Lord, what will be the outcome of this be? And he replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end." So here's Daniel, okay, given a prophecy that is for a far-off time. Much of what people think Revelation was written for. Daniel's prophecy was written for a far-off time. In what we know from history, if Daniel's speaking about the end of the Jewish age, which is what we're talking about here, he's talking about a period 500 years down the road. And so it has nothing to do with you, Daniel, nothing to do with your generation, nothing to do with your time. Seal it up. It's for another time. Why then is John's revelation, is he told, don't seal the book, the time is near? Wouldn't he tell John, John, this is not for your generation. It's for 2,000 years down the road for another generation technologically advanced, and your people, your generation will never understand this. No, he doesn't tell John that. He says, John, the time is near. Don't seal the words of the prophecy, because the time of the occurrence of this vision is now. It's near. Daniel's visions were centuries away from their fulfillment at the time of the end, not the end of time. I'm reading from page 12. This denotes the end of the Old Covenant world of Jewish national privilege. In the New Testament, it is referred to the last days or the end of the age. In contrast to Daniel's order, the Lord commanded John not to seal, but to send his book to the churches. Its message was urgent because the time was near. Now, with that being said, it raises the question: how could the time be near for the 70 A.D. destruction of Jerusalem, or the period when all of this really broke out, the worst of it? If the Revelation was written during the time of Domitian's reign, which was popularly taught today at 95 or 96, that's 25 years later. Well, the fact is, it's most likely that this book was not written in 95 or 96 AD, but in fact it was probably written sometime before the destruction of Jerusalem. So most scholars think sometime in the 65, between 65 and maybe 68 or 69, a few years before, and that would make sense to the prophecy that the time was near, okay? Because the destruction would happen in 70 AD. The war, the worst of the war would be from 66 to 70 AD. Now, then we have to go about the issue of proving that, okay? Well, there's a lot of non-biblical resources, and you can pick what side you want to be on. But I think most of the best, to me, the best evidence is within Revelation itself. But outside the book of Revelation, we will be looking at that as we go through Revelation. But outside of Revelation, there was a piece of history that I came across not too many years ago that was very, very convincing, and I'm going to share it with you. It's on page 13 of the book. There's a gentleman by the name of Pliny the Younger, and he was a well-known political figure who lived in around 62 to 115 AD. And it really would raise serious questions about the validity of the claims that Domitian, the Emperor Domitian in 95, 96 AD, was this monster persecutor of Christians, and it was a bloodbath in his time, which is commonly what's thought today. Pliny writes a letter to Emperor Trajan, and this is dated about 112. Now, Trajan had succeeded Nerva, the emperor, and Nerva had ruled briefly after Domitian's death. And then Trajan ruled Rome from 98 to about 117. So that's kind of the sequence here we have. Now, in his letter to Trajan, which is now going to be about 15, 18 years, maybe as much as 20 years after Domitian's death, this letter from Pliny is enlightening, given that he served as a senator and a governor and held a position in Domitian's court. Here's a man who had served, a political figure, had served in the court of Domitian during this bloodbath of Christian executions and trials and persecutions and everything that was going on. The letter says this: "It is my practice, my lord, to refer to you all matters concerning which I am in doubt. For who can be better given guidance to my hesitation or inform my ignorance? I have never participated in trials of Christians. I therefore do not know what offense it is the practice to punish or investigate, or to what extent." Now, either Pliny had a really bad memory and couldn't remember what had happened 15 years earlier, 18 years earlier. Who would be able to forget a bloodbath of Christians? Or maybe this is not, maybe the whole idea that Domitian there was a bloodbath during his reign is maybe not quite true, and that's even brought out by a gentleman by the name of Brian Jones, who wrote The Emperor Domitian, also points out that there is little to no evidence that Domitian was a persecutor of Christians. Now, he was no angel, okay? None of these emperors were angels. They were, he banished some people from his court, political enemies and things like that, but there's not, the evidence really isn't there until you get within Revelation. And when we get into Revelation, you're going to see much clearer internal evidence within the Bible itself of its time that it was written. But this is a powerful piece of evidence that makes me have to ask, well, where was all this great persecution then? If here's a man sitting on his court during his reign that never saw a trial. So it raises questions that need to be asked. So we come to really what we do know about the bloodbath would be Nero's reign. See, from the time of about 64 to 68, when Nero burned Rome and he blamed the Christians, he made them the scapegoat, and horrible persecution took place at that time. And so I began to tie these things to the book of Revelation, to the Olivet Discourse, and demonstrate that this great tribulation that we're all worried about, or people are all talking about, actually was something that occurred in the past. And these students were awakened to entirely new and liberating perspectives on redemptive history and new possibilities for their lives. And really what I want you to see as a listener, as a reader, as a hearer, the great tribulation they feared was not waiting up ahead for us, but is in fact behind us. And when the apostles declared the nearness of the end, they were not mistaken, and perhaps it is we, not they, who are getting it wrong. It was near in their time. They saw it coming. That was they described the coming of the presence of the Lord in great socio-political upheaval in the precisely the same manner that it would have happened in the Old Testament. Isaiah 19:1, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud. Does that sound familiar? Coming on a cloud? And is about to come to Egypt. That was written in Isaiah's day. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence. This was God's judgment coming down on Egypt. I believe one writer pointed out this is like the 6th century BC. He bowed the heavens also and came down with thick darkness under his feet. He rode on a cherub and flew. He sped upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his hiding place, a canopy around about him, darkness of waters, thick clouds of the skies. Psalm 18:9-11. Describing David's deliverance from Saul as God came down on his behalf. And the whole landscape of the political world changed as Saul passed out of history, and David, who was to be the son or the forefather of the Lord Jesus, assumes power in Israel. This is grand stuff in the realm of the Spirit, in the realm of the kingdom. These are huge events, and they're described that way. But for now, we're over time again. But God bless you. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time.